The Bitcoin ultra bull Robert Kiyosaki is now saying that you only need 0.00000001 Bitcoin to get rich. We're examining what's behind this statement, as the Bitcoin price corrects, and Kiyosaki has an interesting take on it. Plus, US intel agencies are getting bullish on Bitcoin and aim to boost it. Tulsi Gabbard supports Bitcoin. Moreover, US intelligence agencies are now getting bullish on Bitcoin and want to pump the Bitcoin price. The future director of US intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, is now speaking positively about Bitcoin. This is ultra crazy what's going on right now. Before we get to Robert Kiyosaki's amazing statement that just having Satoshi is enough to get rich, let's quickly look at what's going on with the intelligence agencies, why the CIA and others are now bullish on Bitcoin. I've reported on this before, that Donald Trump is really going all in on Bitcoin with his new team. Now they're bullish on Bitcoins. I've reported many times that Donald Trump is really going all in on Bitcoin with his new team. It doesn't matter if it's the health minister, the finance minister, the SEC, the regulatory agency, or all the advisors behind the scenes. There are so many other jobs out there. I can't even think of all the ministries, from Elon Musk to Vivek Ramaswamy to Vans and so on. We could go through the whole list now. Howard Lutnick, blah, 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 JF Kennedy, and so on. The whole list is bullish on Bitcoin. Now we have the next candidate, and the news just came in that the future director of the US intelligence agency, Tulsi Gabbard, says there's value in the US having its own strategic Bitcoin reserve. So she's also advocating for a Bitcoin reserve now. And that's often the argument that comes up. Hey, even if Donald Trump might not fully understand Bitcoin, even if there are still some uncertainties, his advisory team is really on the ball and is increasingly positioning itself in favor of Bitcoin. I mean, we now have 2021 Bitcoin supporters even within the intelligence agencies. I believe there are different intelligence agencies, and Gabbard coordinates these agencies like the CIA and others. Interestingly, even the CIA is now leaning towards Bitcoin. Rumors about the CIA creating Bitcoin are nonsense, but you can't prove it didn't happen, so it's unprovable. And it's very, very interesting that even the CIA or whatever here tends to be focused on Bitcoin. There are always rumors that the CIA created Bitcoin, which is absolute nonsense in my opinion, but yes, you can't prove that it wasn't like that, so it's a statement that you can neither prove nor disprove or anything like that. And a lot of people are now becoming more and more bullish here because the whole Bitcoin reserve strategy scenario is becoming more and more bullish because more and more players are joining who are positive here. Now, there's also the crypto team around Donald Trump that's positioning itself positively, but there are always a few critics, and that's something we need to consider too. Max Keiser says something really interesting. He claims that a rude awakening is coming for Trump in 2021, saying he can't control Bitcoin. If the US buys 1 million Bitcoin, it will benefit the countries with the least debt and cheapest energy, especially Russia. It won't benefit countries with the highest debt, like the US and China. Just imagine if Russia were to pull a sailor move, basically saying that the US has high energy costs, while there are countries with very, very low energy costs. He mentioned that Russia has much lower energy costs in 2021 compared to the U.S. And what's happening now? Russia is mining Bitcoin, but if the Russians can mine Bitcoin cheaper, there are already signs of this. They use Bitcoin for trade, they own Bitcoin. He says if the US buys 1 million Bitcoin, it boosts Russians' bags. If they go all in, the US reserve boosts Russians' bags, as Russians mine cheaper. They extract more with the same machines, making it more efficient. And he says here, if the USA now, for example, if the US buys 1 million Bitcoin, it would massively boost the Russians' bags. And if the Russians really go all in on Bitcoin, this is what he's saying, if they pull a sailor move and dive deep into Bitcoin, it could lead to the US strategic Bitcoin reserve not pumping their own bags, but rather those of others. The Russians have the strategic advantage of being able to mine Bitcoin much cheaper, which means they can extract a lot more with the same mining machines, making their operation way more efficient than the U.S. And that's why, especially in 2021, if the US establishes a strategic Bitcoin reserve, countries with very low electricity costs will have a massive competitive advantage. And that's the big warning that Max Keiser is giving. I mean, it's really hard to gauge what's actually going on. Is a Bitcoin reserve strategy coming or not? Trump must act fast. Casual Bitcoin buys let Russians gain more due to cheaper power, warns Keiser. If he just buys Bitcoin casually, then exactly what Max Keiser is saying could happen. The Russians would have the cheaper electricity costs and would end up accumulating way more Bitcoin than the U.S. And then the US will just be pumping the Russians' bags. And that's basically the big danger. There are also other critics who say that such a Bitcoin reserve strategy isn't going to happen. Feel free to write in the comments how you see it all. Now, there's another really interesting statement from Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, who keeps sharing his thoughts on Bitcoin. I listened to an interview with him yesterday, He says he has this many tons of gold, he has that many tons of silver, but now he also owns 77 Bitcoin, or was it 76 Bitcoin? He owns something like 70 Bitcoin. And he actually tweeted something really interesting, saying, buy a Satoshi now and get rich. So he's saying that just 0.00000001 Bitcoin is enough to build wealth for generations. And I'm not sure if he meant it 100% seriously, but he probably exaggerated a bit. Robert Kiyosaki is known for making somewhat controversial statements sometimes, and he does tend to exaggerate a bit, but it's also totally justified because that way you can really trigger something in people and get them thinking. I actually did the math on that. Right now, 450 Bitcoin are being mined every day. That's what I mean here. And if you break that down to 8 billion people, so if you divide it by 8 billion people, that means each person would get 5.625 Bitcoin of the newly mined supply per day if you were to distribute it evenly across the global population. So if you're buying just about 6 Bitcoin a day, you actually have more Bitcoin available per day right now. That's what comes into circulation if we just have an even distribution, if we say, okay, let's split it among the 8 billion people. And that's a really interesting thing because it means that if you just buy a coffee or a soda or something, you've theoretically already bought a whole year's worth of Bitcoin and will have more Bitcoin than what the average person gets newly issued in a year. That's what comes into circulation if we just have an even distribution, if we say, okay, let's split it among the 8 billion people. And that's a very, very interesting thing because it means that if you just buy a coffee or a Coke or something like that, you've theoretically already bought a whole year's supply of Bitcoin and you'll have more Bitcoin here than the average person ever gets into circulation or distributed every year. You can really see that Robert Kiyosaki gets it because he says, hey folks, you shouldn't be crying about the falling Bitcoin prices, since a lot of people are always whining. He's like, boo-hoo, don't complain so much, you clowns, but instead be happy and be grateful that the Bitcoin price is dropping. And that's really the key point. He says, boo-hoo, boo-hoo, don't whine so much, you clowns, but instead be happy and be grateful that the Bitcoin price is falling. And that's ultimately always the key point. You really have to understand falling prices are buying opportunities. Falling prices and bear markets are also moments when money is transferred from weak hands to strong hands. I mean, that's what Robert Kiyosaki has been saying for ages. Savers are losers. If you're making any cash, even if you're earning euros or more per year or even per month, and you just keep it all in fiat currencies like euros, dollars, rubles, yuan, or whatever, you're just a massive loser. The key to building wealth and making your money work for you doesn't even have to be a huge amount, but at the very least, you need to put your money into something solid. Kiyosaki says you can buy gold, silver, or Bitcoin. The key thing is really to build wealth here, to earn your money. It doesn't have to be that much, but at least invest your money in something solid. Kiyosaki now says you can buy gold, silver, Bitcoin. I would say, okay, hey, buy Bitcoin, gold, and silver. But hey, if someone still wants to buy gold or silver, they can totally do that. But for me, Bitcoin clearly has many advantages over silver and gold. It's easier to transport, simpler to handle, and more censorship resistant. Bitcoin is definitely scarcer. But for me, Bitcoin clearly has many advantages over silver and gold, which is why I'm more in the Bitcoin camp than the silver or gold camp. It's just easier to transport, simpler to handle, more censorship resistant, and it's definitely scarcer. Plus, it has a much higher upside potential. So if you buy a gold bar, you're probably not going to see a 10x return in the next 10 years. But with Bitcoin, that's totally possible. So if you buy a gold bar now, you're probably not going to see a 10x return in the next 10 years. But with Bitcoin, that's super easy to achieve. I read something cool earlier, and it says, if 1 million Bitcoin seems far off to you, remember that Bitcoin has already increased tenfold 8 times, starting from 1 cent. It just needs one more tenfold increase to hit $1 million. Perspective is everything. It just needs one more tenfold increase to reach $1 million. Perspective is everything. Normally, I don't discuss price, but I can't help thinking about how many will gain the ability to be more authentic and spend time on what they love. This is crucial because we've seen tenfold increases before, and reaching $1 million Bitcoin price is just another one. Sure, the market cap will be higher, making it harder, but over 5 to 10 years, a tenfold increase shouldn't be surprising. If this hasn't opened your eyes, think about it. Metaplanet, heavily invested in Bitcoin, and MicroStrategy, a top stock in Japan, are both leveraged Bitcoin companies. And sure, you could say that the market cap will be higher, making it harder to achieve a tenfold increase, but if you look at it over a longer time horizon, let's say 5 to 10 years, a tenfold increase shouldn't really be a surprise. And if this hasn't opened your eyes yet, you really need to think about it. Metaplanet, which is a company heavily invested in Bitcoin, and the best performing stock in Japan is MicroStrategy, another leveraged Bitcoin company. The best stock in the US is Bitcoin. It's the top performing asset out there. MicroStrategy's convertible bonds are the most powerful ones out there, and they're flying off the shelves like hotcakes. The Bitcoin ETF is the most successful ETF ever created. It has even surpassed gold ETFs, and the whole network keeps growing with new adoption drivers coming in. We even have a potential Bitcoin reserve strategy ahead of us. Then you really need to give yourselves a reality check and get clear on what it means to own even small amounts of Bitcoin. I'm not saying that 0.00000001 Bitcoin is going to make you super rich. You have to be clear about that. I mean, it really depends on your investment horizon. If you wait until 2140, then maybe even a Satoshi could make you rich. But you just have to understand that the less Bitcoin you have, the longer your investment horizon needs to be. That means, for example, if you have 0.1 Bitcoin, it could be that in 10 or 15 years, depending on your lifestyle, you might find yourself in a situation where you can't even spend your Bitcoin. So basically, your Bitcoin stack is growing faster. Or rather, the purchasing power of Bitcoin is increasing quicker than you can spend it. But if you only have, say, 0.000001 Bitcoin, then you might not have to wait 10 years before you can retire early. But if you only have, for example, if you only have 0.000001 Bitcoin, then you might not have to wait 10 years before you can retire early. Or early retirement is always such a weird term because I don't like the word retirement. It implies that you stop working, and work is seen as something bad and all that. The best thing is always to do what you love. Then you never really have to work. You're just on fire for what you do from the heart. But if you if you have less, like 0.000001 Bitcoin or something, then you might not have to wait 10 years, but maybe 30 or 40 years until you get to a point where you could theoretically be a private investor or just a Bitcoin chill person, where you're just lounging by the pool and your Bitcoin never runs out because the purchasing power is increasing faster than the Bitcoin you can spend. And that's basically what you need to take away from this. The longer your time horizon, the less Bitcoin you need, and the shorter your time horizon, the more Bitcoin you need. So if you want to be a private investor today, for example, and live solely off your Bitcoin stack, then you probably definitely need over 1 Bitcoin, likely even well over 1 Bitcoin, maybe 3, 4, or 5 Bitcoin, whatever. It really depends on your lifestyle. If you want to be a private investor and live solely off your Bitcoin stack, then you probably definitely need over 1 Bitcoin, likely even well over 1 Bitcoin, maybe even 3, 4, or 5 Bitcoin, whatever. It always depends on your lifestyle. If you still don't have enough Bitcoin or think you need to accumulate more, I'll put a link to 21 Bitcoin down below. Absolutely super easy app and way to buy Bitcoin, fully regulated for beginners. For pros, there are savings plans, limit orders, auto wallet transfers, and a lot of cool features. I highly recommend it. Here, you can also get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin with the code BitcoinHotel. And now I'm going to show you our Bitcoin to the moon explosions escalation giga hyper bullish Bitcoin fireworks. Drop a comment down below rating this fireworks show from 1 to 21 million stars. How many stars would you give it?